Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Just did my ACC Power Rankings. Starting that, we're going to continue on the ACC trend and talk about Clemson. Is Clemson football back? This is an interesting program, an interesting team, and a team that has really kind of seemed like they haven't kind of embraced this new era of college football, but is that kind of changing? When Dabo Swinney was asked earlier this week in an interview with The Athletic if he thought he was the right guy for this era, if he ever kind of questioned could he actually do it, he was surprised by the question, which doesn't really happen to Dabo Swinney, and he basically said no, absolutely not. He kind of went on a whole monologue, that's Dabo Swinney's type thing, and he was like, I've had as much fun these past few years as I've had ever throughout coaching. And it's interesting. That's a lot different than kind of what we've been hearing from Dabo the past few years. He's been a guy that's historically kind of been resistant to change. But I think one kind of little anecdote that's interesting and kind of showcases this Clemson program is last year, Cade Klubnik was called into Dabo Swinney's office. He had kind of been coming off an uneven first year as a starter, and there were calls for Clemson to replace him by fans, by media outlets, by a lot of different sources. There were agents from quarterbacks calling, seeing if that position was potentially open at Clemson to start. And so Klubnik got called into the office, and Dabo Swinney basically sat him down and said, listen, you're my guy. We're going to lean on you. We're not changing quarterbacks. You're not going anywhere. This is your team. This is your offense. And so then Cade Klubnik goes off, and what does he do last season? He finishes second in the ACC in touchdown passes behind only Cam Ward, enters this year with a little bit of Heisman buzz, and he kind of looked back on that sit-down as a turning point. So that story, I think, really showcases the overall kind of judgment viewpoint of the Clemson program and why Clemson's positioned well for this new era. So for years, the narrative has been that, Dabo's been reluctant to take transfers. And this was easy to tie to the dip in the program's kind of performance from, they had the 2015 to 2020 run where they're in the college football playoff every year, pretty much in contention every single season. Then you go pretty much after 2020, and it almost co-aligns with when NIL all really started. They've kind of had a dip in the on-field. So when you look at the timing, it was pretty easy to say that, hey, okay, this makes sense. Clemson's not bringing in transfers. They're not winning. Boom. That's easy. But this has kind of changed, especially when you look at last season. So last season, Clemson sneaks in to the playoff, wins the AACC, and they weren't really in contention throughout the year. It was pretty much SMU, Miami. Those were the two big programs that were being mentioned as ACC champions throughout the entire year. That doesn't happen. It's the Clemson Tigers that win. They sneak into the playoff. They do lose in their first-round matchup to Texas by 2 touchdowns, which was actually the closest first-round matchup last year. But even despite they lose, this run of getting into the college football playoff really has kind of reinstalled confidence, a sense of validation in this Clemson program. And Clemson added 3 transfers this offseason, which obviously not a huge number, but when you're looking at what Clemson has added previously, that's a big difference. They add 3 transfers. They bring in a couple guys. Their athletic director writes a letter to the Clemson fans saying that they plan on using that entire portion of the revenue sharing potentially coming down from the House settlement. They were planning on sharing the maximum amount of revenue. And then that same week, Dabo Swinney kind of said that this is not going to be the same. Nobody's now going to have more money than us at Clemson, and we might actually be on a kind of a level playing field. Then their overall strategy is still staying the same. They're recruiting, they're developing, they're training their guys. Maybe they don't bring in as many transfers, but they don't lose any. Clemson, they also are still emphasizing academics. They annually have one of the top graduation rates throughout college football. They had 99% mark, which was tied for the best at the Power Conference level in the most recent NCAA survey. So this is something where they are banking on that culture. They're banking on that to capitalize on kind of the new market inefficiency, where there's players that obviously are going to do the NIL, are going to try to get the most money they can. But then there's the other guys that, they want more of that old school college football approach where they go to a program, they develop there, they go to school there, they finish there. That's what Clemson's trying to emphasize. And that could potentially help them when you have recruits that may be getting turned off by, this everybody's transferring every year. You're kind of just trying to get more and more money each season. That could turn off some guys. In a recent interview, TJ Parker, Peter Woods, who are two of their huge leaders, both in terms of on the field and in the locker room, they both said that this makes players work harder for the program. They want to see their program do well. They want to kind of reward their loyalty. And if you look at all along, Clemson was never really winning with elite recruiting classes. Yes, you did have Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence come in, two huge quarterbacks. But if you go back to his first class, Dabo Swinney's first class at Clemson in 2009 to present day, their average recruiting ranking is 13.9, so basically 13th, 14th in the country. So they've never been a top 5 recruiting team. They've never been, yes, there's certain years where that kind of happened, but for the most part, that hasn't really been the case at Clemson. And even after Trevor Lawrence left, Clemson still went 10-3, 11-3, 9-4, 10-4. So 4 straight years of at least 9+ wins. And this is a program that the expectations have completely changed since he's been there. You look at, they've won 3 national championships in 130 seasons, but now the expectation pretty much is every year they're competing for a national championship. And if they're not, it's kind of a disappointment. You also look at changes in the coaching staff. Dabo Swinney is a guy that's historically been resistant to change on the coaching staff, but in the past few seasons, brings in Garrett Riley in 2023 before that season from TCU to run the offense. This year makes another huge hire on defense in bringing in former Penn State defensive coordinator Tom Allen to kind of help that unit. And Dabo Swinney, he had all the facts. He's like, we're the 5th winningest team in the country since 2020. We've been to the playoffs 7 out of the last 10 years. This is a team that's won the ACC 8 out of the last 10 years. So in the past 10 seasons, they've won 8 ACC titles. They've won 2 national championships. So 10 total championships in the past decade for Clemson. This is not a program that really did fall off. If we actually think about it, yeah, they had a couple years where they weren't, top 3 in the country, top 4 in the country, but this is a program that's still consistently competing at the highest level of the sport. And if you think about it, Dabo Swinney's always been that kind of voice of resistance, the face of resistance, but he's really said now recently that that's not the case. He wants that this to change, kind of. He said this is the best time in college football history. Did still sound like a traditionalist at times, of course. That's just kind of how he is. But he's been a guy that's advocated for the Super League, a new Super League, a guy that's been excited about that possibility. Hasn't really bemoaned players getting paid, not traded. And a team that I think is going to be open to still keeping their standards, still keeping kind of that team culture while improving on the margins. You bring in transfers that fit your program. You pay the guys that you want to keep. That's going to be huge for Clemson. In the short term, they're excited about this season. Klubnik is in his 3rd year as a starter now. You have 8 starters back on each side of the ball. And you also have their kicker returning, who basically won the ACC for them. And then in the long term, Clemson should be positioned pretty well, if you think about it. The end of their lawsuit against the ACC means that they could potentially change conferences, move into a better one in the next few seasons, and they're probably going to get more money because of the league's new revenue distribution model, where TV ratings are king. Clemson, obviously, in terms of ACC programs, their games are going to drive a lot of eyeballs, and this is going to be a team that might have an easier path to the college football playoff than a lot of other big-time brands. So I think Clemson, I don't know if they ever left. Let's be honest. This is a team that's still going to be up there. This is a program that will be one of the top 10 programs in the country in this kind of next era, I think, if they maintain their culture and add on the margins, kind of incorporate these concepts slowly. This could be a program that really maintains their run of success. So we're going to take our last short break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more Big Ten, finish off my Big Ten quarterback list and those rankings. So stick with us. We'll be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.